Okay, folks, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show. We've had quite the first hour. Our guest in the studio, by the way, I should mention him, is our good friend Chris Fraser, who just got back from Florida and was sharing some of the anecdotes about the differences between Florida and Ontario right now, and how Florida seems to have a much more sensible grasp on how to deal with this whole mess than we do. So that was in the first half hour. You want to catch the podcast. That'll be available tomorrow, Joseph?
Yes, Thursday morning.
Okay. Thursday morning. First segment, Thursday morning. I knew that. I'm just checking. I'm just making sure. Okay. The other thing that's in the news today we wanted to get into, and I thought I had it open and I don't see it, but there's other stories along the same lines I haven't had a chance to read yet, so I don't really want to quote from. But there is a revolt growing in the business community. The article I saw earlier today said about 250 Toronto businesses plan to reopen in defiance of the ongoing lockdown. And I think this is something you could have seen coming from a long, long way away. It's business cannot stay eternally closed. They cannot continue to pay people when there's no revenue coming through the door. And I was thinking about it today. I saw an article a few months ago where 60,000 restaurants were supposed to be gone by the time this situation was over. And I said, okay, most of those are probably going to be little mom-and-pop diners, so they'll have a staff of about 4, 2 waitresses, a line cook, and, they would rotate them. And you'd have, 4. And I did the math. I came up with about 250,000 jobs that would be lost. Well, the article that I don't have in front of me now, which I wish I did, said that there were 220,000 jobs lost in the last 6 months because the businesses, specifically restaurants, just couldn't hang on. So I wasn't all that far off. And not that I have a crystal ball, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that number is going to go up fast if these businesses continue to stay closed. You can't get milk from a stone. You've got to be in business, and if you're in business, you've got to be making money. Otherwise, you're not going to be around. And in the normal scheme of things, in the normal free market economy, that happens all the time, but never on this kind of a scale. So the best thing the government can do is to allow these businesses to reopen and get out of our way.
Off our backs and out of our pockets.
Exactly. I was at the shopping center this past weekend. So I'm in the Walmart, and I'm walking around getting some stuff. And then as I'm walking down the hallway of the shopping center, I'm looking at all these stores that are closed. For example, one of them is like The Source, which sells, audio equipment and whatnot. So I could go and buy headset speakers like the one I'm wearing right now at Walmart, but The Source can't sell them to me. Like, what's the deal there?
Well, first of all, this whole idea of a business revolt, I'm as a conservative, I'm always cautious about supporting revolts and revolutions, etc. But in this case, I think it's called for. I think the best way to ensure that a bad law is rescinded. First of all, enforce it strictly, and then once people realize how stupid it is, then everybody should just ignore it. And it's a funny thing because we'll circle back to what you were just saying there in a second, Chris. But along those lines, ever since the Boxing Day stay-at-home order that was imposed by the Ontario government, nobody's staying at home. There are businesses that are closed, right?
Right.
But people are still out, and I've said it over and over and over again. I don't have any problem with people going out and congregating on nature trails, but every day when you drive out around where I live, where there are a lot of nature trails, and they're maintained, so there are parking lots and that, and the parking lots are full to overflowing,
right,
at all hours of the day. And I'm thinking to myself, nobody's staying at home. Nobody is staying at home. So, I shouldn't say nobody. I mean, maybe a few people are, but yeah. I haven't stayed at home. Of course, we're doing broadcasting, right? So we're exempt from stay-at-home, actually, interestingly enough.
We're an essential service.
You're laughing, but I'm not joking. What we do on this show gives us an exemption from staying at home. So, okay, great.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, in today's world, and the way that media covers politics in general, and the mainstream media in particular, we are an essential service because we do our very best to bring the most accurate and up-to-date information we can to as many Canadians as who want to listen to us, which is the same thing that the news media is supposed to do in a democracy anyway. That's their traditional role. Since they've dropped the ball, we picked it up. Okay. And I think that in that sense, we are an essential service. Okay. And I don't mean that maliciously.
Okay, so no, of course not. But let's go back to what you were saying, Chris, and that was about the businesses. And Nick and I have talked about this until we're blue in the face, and it's just, and not just us, but the other people have been talking about it as well. And we've tweeted about it, posted on Facebook, written columns, and this is a serious issue, and it's exactly what you're saying. Is if it's safe to shop for anything in a grocery store, right? Okay, if you're following the rules, you're wearing a mask, social distancing, and following the directions on the floor, the arrows or whatever. Okay, but if you're following the rules, it's safe to shop in the grocery store. Okay, so but buying groceries is an essential service. So, but what about Costco and what about Walmart? Okay, you go to Costco and you go to Walmart, you go shopping for clothing, you go shopping for a headset, as you say, computer if you want. You can buy computers at Costco, very nice computers. So, if it's safe to do that at Costco, why isn't it safe to do it at Mark's Work Warehouse? Although Mark's Work Warehouse is a box store, right? So let's talk about just the small mom and pop places. It doesn't make sense, and that's the problem. And we were talking about this in the pre-production meeting. Finally, we get to talk about something that we actually talked about.
That's right.
And that is that in the province of Quebec now, that has been under a very restrictive shutdown for weeks and weeks. So this coming Monday, they're going to allow non-essential stores to open, and they're going to allow restaurants to start to open up again. But they're keeping the curfew in place. And I'm shaking my head, and I'm going, but where is the sense in that?
That actually makes the situation worse in some ways, because if you keep the curfew on and you're saying to people, stores are open, now you've given people this small window of time to go into the stores. You're going to have more people in the stores. As Professor Ian Lee from the Sprott School of Business here in Ottawa said, it's better to tell stores, stay open till midnight. That way, if I want to go to the store at midnight, spread it out. Have fewer people, make it less dense in the store. And then that way you'll have less chance of spreading COVID. Spread it out. Open late.
100%. You are 100% right, and it's just common sense.
This actually, I know I don't believe we don't believe in consigning conspiracy to what can be explained by stupidity. And I think this is a classic example of that. This is just people wanting to do something, not knowing what to do, but determined to do something anyway, and they do a tremendous amount of damage based on either half-truths or flat-out wrong information, and nobody's willing to stand up and say, oops, I goofed, that's bad on me, and take the heat for it. Because if they do that, now their career, in whatever shape it takes, they think it could be over. So you have a big element of fear that's propelling this. I think a lot of people are out there know the truth or think they have a version of the truth that would make a lot of sense if explained right. All walking around going, yeah, I'd love to say something about it, but I got a family to feed, which I understand. I get it, But at the same time, somebody's got to stand up and say the truth. Somebody's got to be the one to light the fuse. So this is why I say you could see this coming for a long time, because the more frustrated people get. And the other thing that makes this frustrating isn't even the laws themselves. It's how they are not applied to our government officials the way they are applied to us. Where was Trudeau over Christmas? He was in the Caribbean. Were we allowed to go to the Caribbean? No. Where was Trudeau over Easter? He was at home with his family. What did he tell us not to do? Go home and spend time with our families. The hypocrisy, and not just him. We have provincial government officials and high-end medical officials who just flaunt the laws and go. And where was John Tory? He was down in Florida at one of his mansions down there for about a couple of weeks. Did he self-quarantine? No. Did he mention the fact he was down there? No. So it's this constant barrage of hypocrisy that wears people out, and somebody sooner or later is going to, if they, start standing up and say, okay, that's enough. We need to have the adults back to the table because this is insane.
Well, getting back to the question of how it is we find ourselves in a situation where we have all of these restrictions, etc., and then trying to find ways to make sense of them. I think that part of the problem, again, has been that the government is starting from the position that this is a public health emergency, and there is an element of a health emergency in it, but at its basic root, at its most fundamental level, it's not a public health emergency. And so, because there are lots of elements to these kinds of pandemics, if you will, or mass events, etc., and there are a lot of levers that have to be pulled and adjusted in response. And the mistake that the government has made is it's put in charge of the response the doctors, because on its surface this is a health issue, right? So the doctors come in, and I mean, there's no surprise here. How do doctors deal with an outbreak of the measles? Well, we're going to quarantine the family. We might shut down the school or whatever if there was a serious outbreak. If there was an outbreak of a particular thing at a hospital, they'd isolate the ward. They might isolate the floor. They might even isolate the whole hospital. Okay? So that's a typical, understandable, predictable response. And so you go to the doctors and say, how do we handle this pandemic? And they're going to go, well, you have to isolate. You have to do this, that, and that. So what they're doing is they're taking what they would do in their world, and they're transposing it, if they will, expanding it, so and applying it to the whole country or the whole province on all kinds of levels that you don't have to. And so what ends up happening then is the government imposes these restrictions, and then they realize that many of the restrictions don't work or don't make sense. So what they do is rather than saying we're going to have a limited, targeted number of restrictions to deal with the problems where the problems exist, rather than doing that, what they do is they have a universal response, and then they have to walk that universal response back with exceptions and exemptions, etc.
Yeah, you just reminded me of something, Joseph. There is a seniors' home very close to where I live, and I belong to a social club that meets in that seniors' home once every 2 weeks. Every once in a while, in the pre-COVID days, we'd be getting ready for our Thursday meeting, and we'd get a call or a note, or somebody would go there, and they'd say, sorry, folks, you guys can't meet here tonight.